Hey everybody, it's Mark Pattison. I'm back again with another great episode of Finding Your Summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. Before we get into today's great episode with a rock star climber, I wanted to draw attention to my website, www.markpattisonnfl.com. And once again, you can go there and you can find a link to the feature film that the NFL did on my Everest journey and more. You can find that again on the link. There's a little red button that will take you right there. Number two is there's over 225 different podcasts, just like this one, that are out inspiring people like myself and others to do awesome things. And we all need inspiration at the end of the day, especially as we go into 2022 and we reset goals amongst all this coronavirus mess once again. And then number three is I continue to raise money for my daughter, Amelia's Everest. All proceeds, 100% of them go to Higher Ground, great organization here in Sun Valley, Idaho. It's all about empowerment, and that's what it does. And people like my daughter Amelia are getting healed every day, which is what we all want to see happen as we go forward here. And finally, if you need a public speaker, I'm out there. I'm being called on and talk about awesome things, all things Everest and the 7 summits and the Sports Illustrated and all kinds of different great stuff that I'm up to and the climbs ahead. So on that note, let's jump into today's wonderful guest, Kim Hess. Kim, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Well, I had to spit all that stuff out there as normal, just get the plugs in before we get going here. But so I've been aware of you for a while, and I always am. My eye seems to attract to others that have done the 7 summits. And in your case, you've got something a little larger planned, which is something called the Grand Slam. So before we get into your 7 summits, because you've got a lot of trials and tribulations, I want to, first of all, let's explain what the Grand Slam, I of course know what it is, but why don't you explain what the Grand Slam is and what you're trying to accomplish?
Sure. So the Grand Slam is climbing the 7 summits, and the 7 summits is the tallest peak on each continent. Outside of that, then you have to ski to the North Pole and the South Pole. Sounds a little miserable, to be honest, but also really exciting.
Yeah, and I can tell you, and you've always been there, of course, to Antarctica. So Antarctica is actually where you launch, and to go to the South Pole. And it sounds really intriguing to me, just because, I don't know, it's 7 to 10 days to essentially cross-country ski up. You don't have any wild, crazy animals chasing you down, trying to hunt you. You don't have a floating glacier of icebergs carrying you 3-4 miles away and having to retrack. You don't have to go through the water, all this kind of stuff. So certainly if you're going to do one or the other, the South Pole is definitely the way to go, right?
Oh, 100%. I think for me, the hard part is I live in a ski town, and so I love to ski, and the thought of just not getting to go down anything, just going straight across is, I think, kind of, that will be the mental challenge for me. And then, as you know, it's never dark there and you can't see the horizon. So just sort of being on a different planet for that long sounds intriguing.
Well, look, you've been to Antarctica. I've been to Antarctica. And for those who have not been, which are most people, it's just an amazing adventure. It's like saying and trying to explain going to Mars or someplace. Of course, I've never been there, but there's no real life there. It's kind of a manufactured from the Australians who built up a little town there. Union Glacier town is probably overstated, but, a series of tents where people can land a plane on the ice and then really go to climb Mount Vinson, which you and I have now both climbed. You can go see the penguin colony, and then essentially you can go see or go ski up to the South Pole. And beyond that, there's not a whole lot beyond just, a lot of snow, a lot of white stuff, that's out there on the horizon.
Yeah. It's just this like grand vastness of nothing. And I remember there's no sound, you don't hear birds, you don't hear anything outside of the wind and your feet crunching on the snow. It's a wild place. Yeah.
So I want to stick one more moment on this topic. As my last reading, there's been 12 women who have actually completed the Grand Slam. You want to be in that very select group. There's not that many people overall have climbed the 7 summits, even fewer when you start counting women in that. And I, as a guy who's got 2 daughters, I'm always inspired by others who helping to pave the way. And I'm sure you've been inspired by others. I've had Allison Levine. I'm on the podcast. She's another gal that has done what you're trying to go after. But let's go back to kind of the beginning, right? So there always has to be a beginning. There always has to be some inspiration. Why we are drawn to these different things. I grew up in the town of Seattle, Washington. I was always inspired by the Whitaker brothers, Ed Viesters. Many of these people are now my friends, but back in the day when I was growing up, climbing Mount Rainier was a big deal. And a lot of the people who went on to climb Mount Everest started and really cut their chops on Mount Rainier and many of the peaks around the Cascades. But for you, where did that start?
To be honest, it didn't develop until much later. So I think I was about 8 years old, and my parents, one of their best friends, was showing us pictures of an Everest base camp trek that she did. And back in the 70s. And I remember watching this slideshow, and I just got so fixated on this one photo, and made my mom print out a copy of it, and just always had that photo sort of around. But I was a kid. I didn't really think much of it. And then the older I got, I think probably sometime in high school, I read Krakauer's book, Into Thin Air, about the 96 disaster on Everest. And, most people walked away from that story thinking like, no way in hell would I ever go to Everest. And I just remember being so inspired by it and thought that would be so cool. Never going to do it, but what a great idea. And then in college, the Discovery Channel came out with Everest Beyond the Limit. And I remember sort of watching and hearing and just, made it so much more personal. And again, it was just kind of like, that would be cool, but I'm never, ever going to climb Mount Everest. And then graduated college, traveled for 2.5 years, just sort of searching for my meaning in life and what's my purpose and who am I, what do I want to be when I grow up, all of these questions. And when I got home, candidly, my oldest brother, Steven, and I were drinking at our parents' house for Christmas. And he sort of drunkenly challenged us to do the 7 summits. And I was just broke enough and naive enough to say yes. So the next day we woke up and we started planning it.
We all need an inspiration and some starting point. And certainly that's another one right there. It was interesting because you talk about Krakauer. Another one of my inspirations was a guy by the name of Dick Bass. And Dick Bass is the guy who actually started the 7 summits. I was able to meet him at a charity event with Steve Young many years ago down in Snowbird. And it was totally fascinating. He had just come out with his book, and his climbing partner had just recently died in a helicopter tragic accident. But, again, we all need those people. And, even though he had accomplished it, and even though his partner had died in this tragic helicopter accident, backcountry skiing, it still inspired me kind of the way, it inspired you in different ways. You mentioned this whole idea, because a lot of times, when we start talking about this, about the 7 summits, it's one thing to dream. It's another thing to actually execute. And you mentioned the word, broke, so you're drinking, you're being challenged by your brother. Sounds like a great idea, but maybe no job, or just coming out of college and in debt, or whatever your circumstance is. It's not free, especially when you go to Mount Everest or Antarctica to go pull this stuff off. Right. So I'm fortunate that I monetized my life by the job that I work. But for you, what has that been? I mean, how have you been able to realize that dream of climbing the 7 summits? You've been on Everest twice. We'll talk about that in a minute. But how have you been able to pull that off?
Yeah. So initially, I'm the youngest of 4. I have 3 older brothers. So when your oldest brother challenges you to do something, you're going to do it, right? There's no option to not sort of see that through. That's just how I grew up as a kid. Anything the boys can do, I can do faster has sort of been my motto. So I didn't put a whole lot of thought into it initially. I mean, again, I was, I think 24 at the time, very naive, and just kind of thought, I managed to travel the world for 2.5 years, living on a $10 a day budget. I can do anything. So the first peak we chose was Aconcagua in South America for a lot of reasons. One, as you know, it's the tallest mountain outside of the Himalayas for the 7 summits, and it's relatively inexpensive. And when I say relatively, it was, I think at the time, just under $6,000 to the guide company. And I was living in Steamboat Springs. I was a ski bum at the time. I mean, I'm still a ski bum, but a very broke ski bum, working, 3 jobs, working in a ski shop, a bar, dog sitting, house sitting, anything I could do. And so to come up with $5,000, I realized very quickly was not going to happen. And fortunately for me, my brother is a lot older and was very successful in his career. And he thought, I want to travel and I need somebody to travel with. This was sort of his way to see the world. So he bought the first trip, which I'm super thankful for. He's like, I'll fund it, whatever.
It's your sponsor.
Yeah, he was my sponsor. He needed a travel buddy and I needed his money. So it kind of worked out. And he had miles on Delta. And so really all I had to pay for was the gear, which, as you know, is very expensive. So I kind of started piecing it together slowly. But the first trip was sponsored by brother, which was fantastic. And then I think he paid for part of Kilimanjaro. And I usually used his miles to fly most places, but as the trips got more expensive, I sort of had to think outside the box. And that was sort of like the 8th summit for me, was funding the whole thing.
So net, did you find sponsors? Because sponsors, I mean, it sounds like a really cool, sexy idea, but it is very difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult and awful. I mean, I figured that out pretty quickly, that this was a waste of my time and that I'd have to because I just didn't have the time of the day, considering what the return, the ROI was going to be. Totally. Ultimately, is that how you were able to make that happen, especially when you start talking to Antarctica and Mount Everest? Yeah.
So a lot of it was sponsorship. I did a GoFundMe, which made me so uncomfortable. Here I am. I'm like, I am this white privileged girl asking people to send me to Mount Everest when there's literally starving people all over the world. Like, what is wrong with me? And so I really struggled with that, sort of the asking for help. And it took me a long time and I still am resistant to it. But I realized that people were happy to help because I was doing something extraordinary and it was inspiring to them to watch. And so realizing that was sort of the purpose, and especially for women and, young girls growing up, to see a woman tackle something like the 7 summits was inspiring. And so that was the purpose. But it was sponsorship. It was a lot of no's. It was a lot of hell no's. It was a lot of laughing in my face. It was probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned in life on sort of how to sell yourself and find your worth and what is your pitch and why should people care. And then a lot of it was working my ass off, working and saving and not going to bachelorette parties and missing weddings and working the holidays and not seeing my family and really sacrificing a lot in my personal life and, relationships and everything, putting everything on hold for this dream.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you said it perfectly, is like the pitch and what the hook and ultimately what the inspiration is about other people being inspired about what you're doing, because most people think about things like this, but they don't actually execute it. It takes a tremendous amount of training, discipline, commitment to actually pull these things off. And the trigger point that I really loved, what you said, was about the, inspiring younger girls, because we all look up to somebody. When I was growing up, I was a football guy in my former life. And I was always, I'd think about all these college or professional stars that were out there, and they inspired me to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And you need to have that roadmap. You need to have that blueprint. And, when you do that and you fight through, because nothing is easy, and you actually succeed, it gives hope and possibility to younger girls like mine who are looking, for their own inspiration and different things that they're doing. I want to talk about Denali, because I think Denali, which I was up there in 2017 and we got turned back at Camp 3, 14.2 by minus 80 degree weather. That was 2017. And then went back in 2018 and bagged it. But at the end of the day, that mountain's a mother. And, the amount of weight that you have to drag up there and going up and down and up and down, people just don't have a clear idea and how difficult that is. But something that took you to even like, I'm giving you my moans and groans of that mountain and the challenges. But, for you had a fall. And the first thing I want to ask you is, where did that fall happen?
Well, before the fall, Denali was sort of a mess from the very beginning for me. So as you've stated, it's physically exhausting, right? And I'm a small person. I'm 5'3". At the time, I was probably 115 pounds, not a big person. I'm strong, but I'm not very big. So the thought of dragging a sled and carrying a pack, like I worked my butt off in the gym to make sure that I was ready and that I was going to be a good teammate. And 5 days before the trip, I was at a wedding and I slipped on the dance floor and I broke my foot.
Oh.
And I didn't just sort of hairline fracture. I broke a chunk of my 5th metatarsal out. And I got the x-rays back and I'm just hysterically crying. And I was like, I sold my car to go to Denali. I don't have trip insurance. I'm not getting that money back. $10,000, everything I owned was in this trip. So to have a doctor tell me you can't go because you need surgery on your foot wasn't really something I was willing to accept. So I set my x-ray to about 10 different orthopedic surgeons, and 9 of them said you need surgery now, and you're definitely not climbing a mountain. And one surgeon who's a friend of mine asked if I could get my climbing boot on. And I was like, well, I haven't actually tried. And as you know, climbing boots are so stiff and rigid and heavy that it's sort of like wearing a walking cast. So I jammed my foot in there and I was like, Sour Bray, it's in. It hurts like hell, but it's in. And he's like, great, come to my office. He sort of looked at it and he's like, I think you'll be fine. I don't think you're going to do any permanent damage. He's like, it's going to add a whole other element of difficulty to this mountain. And I'm stubborn enough. I was like, yeah, fine. So got on an airplane, met my brother in Salt Lake City. And I was like, I should probably tell you that I broke my foot. And he's just like, what?
Yeah.
And we had this private conversation where I was like, look, I don't intend on telling anybody about my foot. If I feel like I'm putting myself in danger or the team, I will turn myself around, but I want to make that call. I don't want somebody else to make that call for me. If I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail trying. I'm not going to fail because somebody said, I don't think you can do it. So I climbed Denali with a broken foot and nobody knew except my brother. And so every day in the tent, I would just shove my foot in the snow and cover it. And it was swollen and black and blue and nobody knew. And every day I just sort of fought my own battle going up that mountain. So then to come down, I was on the fixed line heading into Camp 3, and the route should have been moved and it wasn't. There was a crevasse that had sort of opened up and most people were just sort of jumping over it. And by the time I got to it, the last picket, which is the snow stake in the snow that keeps the fixed line there, had popped out. And I remember seeing it and I remember sort of thinking, this isn't right. And next thing I know, the snow broke away and I fell down probably 4 or 5 feet. And my arm was stuck in the fixed line and it just snapped everything in my left wrist.
So let me describe that a little bit. And I completely appreciate everything you're talking about right now, because I know to a foot exactly where you were. So there's about a 800 to 900 foot ice wall that you have to climb. So what you're describing is having summited and now you're coming back down, and right at the base of that 800 foot, 900 foot ice wall, as you're descending or as you're going up, it's right at the very beginning, is this mammoth opening, this big ass crevasse that you have to manage to kind of like hop over and climb over to get kind of into that fixed line. A fixed line is a line that is essentially drilled into the ice. So you're attached to this rope, you're attached to the mountain, not to somebody else as you're going up this very steep wall. So I can completely appreciate that. It's not trivial what you have to kind of climb or get over to do that. And that rope becomes very taut because there's other people above you that are coming down to make it taut. And so having your wrist bent up, wrapped around, snapped off, not literally, but and shattering in so many different places, probably the blessing in all that was that, you'd already summited. So now you're coming back down. So you're not having to deal with that. But nonetheless, you're still, probably a good hour plus away from camp, and you got to climb down and navigate through all those crevasses. And again, that's not trivial. And when you're seriously hurting, you now have a broken foot, and now you have a broken wrist, right?
Yeah, that nobody knows about.
And nobody knows about, and you're having to navigate down that. So from that point, did they fly a helicopter up there and fly you off the top, or did you end up going all the way back?
So at that point, so I was wedged across this crevasse. Thankfully, I wasn't in it. I was just hanging on for dear life. And I couldn't see anybody outside of our assistant guy was leading the first rope team. And I could just see the top of our guide Larry's head. And I just started screaming bloody murder, his name. And finally, he's just like, what? And I just, in so many profound words, I was like, my arm's broken. And he's like, how do you know? I'm like, it's facing the wrong direction. Oh. So I see him run up towards me, and clearly like my hand is facing the wrong direction. So one, it's not just, again, a little fracture, it's displaced, it's bad, but I'm also still on top of a crevasse. So step one was sort of get me out of there. And stop my rope team from coming closer and make sure everybody else was safe. So get me off of there. And then we're sort of sitting there. And when I'm uncomfortable, I start laughing. And so I'm just laughing. And he's just like, this isn't really funny. And I was like, I know it's not, but I don't really know what else to do right now, So we sat there and I was like, I can't feel my fingers. And I was a pre-med undergrad, so I know the body well enough to know that like blood flow is not happening, and that's bad. So he and I decide then and there that we have to set my arm. And as much as it hurt, sort of seeing my arm disfigured was way more painful than him grabbing my fingers and me just yanking back and getting it going the right way. So we set it. I can feel blood going to my fingers again. I'm like, let's splint this and let's go. So we slowly walk down to Camp 3. And then from there, of course, it's Denali and weather is so unpredictable. And the weather moved in, and it moved in for 2 days, and there was nothing I could do. Obviously, I was a liability to the team, so I couldn't climb down. So I waited 2 days for a helicopter, and then eventually they came and got me. And
yeah, so I want to go back to where you reset your, because again, I want to visualize this for people who are listening to this podcast right now. This will also be on YouTube. Thank you. But where this ledge that you're talking about, you literally are sitting kind of on the ledge of a big ass open crevasse, which is pretty damn deep. We had a guy fall into it, probably 30, 40 feet down when I was up there on my second time. But it's no place that, you want to hang out for a long time. And the bottom line, like you said, is bad weather comes in and you want to get back down into those tents. And that camp down there, Camp 3, is one place that the helicopters can land and can pull you up, but they're not coming anywhere if they can't see. And it's all by sight as you go out. So anyways, you make it. Congratulations. Your arm, you're not, they're looking good. So that's awesome. That's awesome news. Let's push to now another, just an intense moment in your time, and that's your Mount Everest experience, because you were there twice. In 2015, there was a massive earthquake. Now, you did go on to summit it and come back in 2016, but let's stay on that moment, because I have a lot of friends that were up there, and I was texting, and it was total chaos, and I can't imagine. And having just returned, I summited Everest May 23rd. And as you know, we both lived up at 17.5 for 2 months, essentially. And so understanding where that earthquake came in, the avalanche, just all the stuff that was happening, I can only imagine how terrifying, because there's no place to run. You're exposed, right? And so tell me like how it all played out for you and the experience. And, obviously you survived it and came back the next year to summit, but what was that like for you, and what was that experience?
I mean, as you know, Everest is such a special place, and you literally put your life on hold to go climb that peak. So to be there and sort of, I've overcome all of the adversity to get there. The financial aspect of it was always the reason I thought I would fail. And so just to be there was so special. And, I'm a ski bum. I'm not wealthy. I'm very different. I'm not the normal person on Everest, right? Most people there wrote a check, no problem. And I, literally spent every dollar I had to get there. So to be there was so special. And every day was so special to me. So when we were doing our second rotation, so as you know, you can't climb Everest in a day, and you do these rotations. So you go up to certain camps, you spend some time, and then you come back down, and then you do it over and over again. So we were doing our first big rotation. We had spent 2 nights at Camp 1 at 19,000 feet, and we were going to Camp 2, Advanced Base Camp, at 21,000 feet. And I had just rolled in to Camp 2. It was around like 11 a.m., sort of like getting settled, picking our tents, getting ready for lunch. And I was in my tent changing, and all of a sudden the earth just started shaking. And, the tents are on these glaciers, and I just looked at my tent mate and I was like, are we about to implode into this mountain? Like, I just felt like this monster was about to eat me and suck me down. And I jump out of my tent. I don't have any shoes on. I'm in my bare feet, and I look over and I make eye contact with our guide. And I don't know what was more terrifying, the fact that the ground was shaking or seeing fear in your guide's eyes, right? That's a look you never want to see. If they're scared, something's wrong. And he just said, run. And I'm like, where are we running? And so I was following our guide, Andy, and we ran to another tent, and we all just sort of sat there and like huddled. And I found my climbing partner, Mingma, and he just put himself on top of me to shelter me. And we sat there. And again, I was laughing because that's what I do when I'm uncomfortable. And, people were praying, people were crying, and we got blasted with this big snow plume. And at the time, I'm like, I had no idea what was going on. It was suffocating. We're just covered in snow, and then it just stops. And it's silent, and everybody's just sort of looking at each other like, what just happened? Was that a really big avalanche? And it took us probably 10 minutes to realize it was an earthquake, and that the earthquake had set off avalanches. And as the day went on, we realized we had gotten hit by 3 different avalanches at Camp 2. So where Camp 2 sits, you've got the western shoulder of Mount Everest, you've got the Lhotse face, and then you have Nuptse. So you're sort of in this like amphitheater fishbowl, and avalanches came off of all 3 peaks and somehow miraculously stopped in crevasses at camp and just hit us with snow. It's a miracle.
Yeah, it is a miracle. And I know exactly what you're talking about. And actually, we had 2 days after we'd come down. So this is now May 25th, 26th. There's a huge avalanche that came down from the Nuptse side and wiped out, completely flattened all the tents at Camp 2.
Really?
So, yeah. So I was so fortunate that I literally was out by that time. But, these things can happen. And, I think another thing that people don't quite understand is it's not necessarily, it is, but it's not the snow that's coming down. But when these avalanches are coming at that velocity, it's the energy within inside of that force that is now picking up rocks and everything else, kind of like a little tornado that's just coming, zooming at you. And that's what becomes so dangerous, especially when you're exposed. And like you said, run where? There's no place to run. I've been there.
Yeah,
so
there's literally nowhere to run.
Yeah, so you just got to take cover.
To die.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just it. So, okay, so you survived that. You ultimately make it back down. I know it was complete chaos in the whole country, and just trying to get out. I can only imagine, what that was like for you, because now let's go back to what you originally said. You're a ski bum. You've scraped up everything. It's like quadruple jeopardy for you, because you spent this money thinking this is going to be a one-time trip. You're going to summit and come back down and go home and celebrate and high five. And now you're not doing that. You're laughing, but you're laughing in the face of defeat. So let's move on to 2016. So you had to reset yourself, right? You had to figure out how you're going to fund this. And then you had to like decide who you're going to go with and get back over there and take this thing on again with no guarantee that it was going to happen, right? So let's walk through, like, who, first of all, who did you use in 2016? What organization?
I went with International Mountain Guides.
Yeah, IMG, great. So yep. So you go up there, you're locked in with those guys. So obviously there was a different experience for you. There was a good weather window. Tell me about, let's go to the top now and kind of going on those final days of your summit push. What was that like for you?
Exhilarating. Oh my God. You just, again, like, I feel so fortunate to have been able to go there once, let alone twice. So by the time I got to Camp 4 and, you're supposed to sleep the night before, I didn't sleep. I was just, laying in my tent, just like it's Christmas morning. And we were supposed to leave. I was supposed to leave at 10 o'clock and I was running late. I don't know, everything just takes that much longer at that altitude. And, regardless, I got out about 30 minutes late. My brother and I are leaving and he stops right before we sort of start heading up. And he's like, you keep going. He was fidgeting with something and I was like, cool. And so I took off and I'm with Mingma and I look up and there's just a steady line of headlights. And I'm thinking, it's really cold. I don't have time to wait behind these slow people. So Mingma looks at me and he says, we go fast? And I just sort of laughed. I'm like, sure, we go fast. So we unclipped from the fixed line, which probably wasn't very smart. We clipped to each other and we just went to the left of the line, broke trail and passed, I don't know, probably 30 or 40 people. Got to the balcony, which is sort of the first flat spot on your summit day where a lot of people, well, everybody swaps out their oxygen tanks, gets some water, has some food, whatever. So we get there. I had caught up with my teammates who had left a couple hours earlier and I'm checking in with our lead guide. And I just said, I'm starting to get kind of cold. I was waiting for my brother. He was taking too long. He finally showed up and I was like, I gotta go. Like, I'm getting really cold standing here. So Mingma and I take off and I'll never forget when we reached the South Summit. So the South Summit is so close to the summit, you can see it, but it can take anywhere from 45 minutes to 3 hours for people to traverse this tiny, tiny section. But I got to the South Summit and the sun was about to come up. And I just remember sitting there and I started crying and I was like, holy shit, I did it. Like, this is happening. And for me, the South Summit was sort of my celebration. It was where I sort of remembered all the people who doubted me. I remembered everybody who said I would never do this. I remembered listening to my own voice that said, you're not strong enough. You'll never find the money, the doubts in my own head, and just laughing at all of the people. And for me, from the South Summit to the summit was like a glorious 25 minutes, and got up top right as the sun came up and just sort of danced. It was awesome. Yeah, that's great. I had a slightly different experience. I was a rock star. I was so strong up until that final day. They woke us up late. We had 20 minutes to get ready. And as you know, that's not the place to have that happen. We'd been in a cyclone, stuck at Camp 3 for 3 days. I hadn't eaten, and then I get snowblind in my left eye. And so trying to go up, I like I said, on every other moment of that journey, super strong, except for that day. And at the end of the day, I made it. It all worked. But I struggled. It wasn't fun. But kind of going back to, I'm sure, a lot of the things that you've done, it's all the chits that you put in the bank that led to a moment where you had the strength, you had the energy, you had the burst to actually make
that ultimate goal. That might have happened for you on Denali or some of these other mountains too. But for me, that's why all that training, all that preparation meets opportunity. It all kicked in when things weren't looking so good for me. So, I'm so happy for you that you were able to go and you can conquer and get up there. And like you said, when you get to the South Summit, I had the same similar feeling because I'd struggled so much. I knew once I got there that this was going to happen all the way. So, okay. So now we once again, we pivot. Okay. And now I know there's been COVID the last couple of years, and your ultimate goal, which still hasn't been realized, you're a rock star. So let's stay there. But to complete the 7 summits, which you and I are both in that club now, you want to now go on and complete the Grand Slam. Again, skiing to the North Pole, skiing to the South Pole. Is that on the radar right now? Or are you just taking a massive time out and saying, I'm just going to kind of wait all this? Because again, it becomes triple jeopardy. You put the money down and it doesn't happen. And especially with COVID and everything else in these countries, you have to bounce around, that you don't get a cash refund if you don't make it.
No, they don't give you your money back. For now, everything's on hold. So I think when I finished the 7 summits, I financially was in massive debt, and I just sort of ignored it for so long. And it got to a point where I couldn't ignore it. I'm like, I got to tackle this. So, that was the 8th summit for me, was my financial debt. So that took me about 2 years to sort of get out of that hole. And then COVID became so very present in our world. And as we were talking about earlier, it's just, you gamble so much in any expedition and there is no guarantee. And I'm very calculated with peaks that I want to climb and plans that I have. And to throw COVID in the mix is something that I'm just not willing to gamble right now. You already are battling so many things, and you can't control COVID. You can't control what's going to happen in other countries and what that status is going to be. So for me right now, most of my stuff is on hold because of that. But also, as we've talked about, I don't have a bunch of money that I can just pay for these trips. So I need sponsorship and I need companies to believe in what I'm doing. And everybody's hurting as a result of COVID. So people aren't exactly shelling out sponsorship money at the moment. And it also doesn't really feel right to ask right now for companies that are, trying to recover from huge financial losses. So for me, the poles are on hold. And the North Pole, nobody's successfully done it in a couple of years. There's been a lot of political issues, and there's just so much that plays into these expeditions that a lot of people don't know about. It's not just the money. It's not just the weather. It's so much more. So at the moment, it's on hold. It is definitely not off the table at all.
I think it's a smart choice on your end. And look, I was going through a bump 10 years ago, and that resulted for me in the 7 summits. I mean, that's how I got into this whole thing, to pull me out of it. And at the end of the day, it's, and I think this is where a lot of people get lost sometimes, is they set a goal and then they give up and they don't see it through. And that was essentially, it took me 9 years to complete. I did 2 of them twice, but 9 years to complete the 7. Right. Yep. And so for you, you're young, you're strong, you got lots of energy. And so this doesn't have to be a tomorrow thing. This is more like a lifelong goal on what you want to accomplish over the term. And it kind of keeps you in the game too. Right. And it doesn't have to happen tomorrow or the next day or after that. But, the motivation of going out and climbing and skiing and doing all the things in the gym that you have to do to prepare yourself, and you put yourself in those situations, is what ultimately will make you successful. And that's great. In addition to the bonus, again, inspiring other young girls to one day look up to people who've done it, come before them, like what you have done and what you are doing.
Yeah. And, I think ultimately when it comes down to doing any sort of big goal or dream, like there has to be purpose and reason behind it. And as you know, when you're, suffering on the side of a mountain, you come back to, why am I here? Yeah. Why am I doing this? And you better have a damn good reason or you'll never succeed. And so for me, the poles are it's such a different challenge. Physically, I don't think that's the problem. I think mentally it's going to be very difficult and very uncomfortable to sort of deal with the elements. And so for me, I need to get super clear on why I want to suffer that bad. And I don't have that vision yet. And so that's a huge reason as well why I'm not ready to do it, because I don't know. I don't have my why. I don't have my reason. And the North Pole is, you're at sea level. So it's humidity and it's freezing and there's polar bears and there's so much that goes into it that if I'm not 100% sure why I'm there, it'll never happen. And I'm not clear on that vision yet. So until I get there, it'll just hang out in my mind.
Well, I've got some great news for you. There's thousands and thousands of mountains around the world that you can go and set your sights on. I just got back from Cotopaxi in Ecuador, and that was a great experience. But again, you can dip your toe in and go have these cultural, amazing experiences without going all in on, quadruple jeopardy on are you going to get eaten by a polar bear or these other things that come along the way, right?
Totally.
So that's the key. So, all right, where can people find you?
You can find me all over the place. I have a website. It's kimhessclimbs.com. I have a blog, try to stay up to date, although I don't feel very inspired in my writing at the moment. I need an adventure. But yeah, that's the best place to sort of see what I'm up to.
Yeah, I love that. And I know you can tap into all your different social channels there as well. So kimhessclimbs.com is the place. Kim is the one who's put this all together. She's inspired us all. So thank you so much for coming on. You're an inspiration, as I said. And I'm just always jacked when I get to talk to another fellow Seventh Summit or we're in the club. And so it's really cool what you pulled off.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. There she is, the one, the only Kim Hess. Thank you so much.
Hey, and thank you so much for listening to the Find Your Summit podcast. We are so glad to have you along for this journey. And if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, share it on iTunes, spread it to the planet. We're looking to broadcast this to every person that is out there because, as you know, everybody has their own summit that they're going after. Okay, if you're looking to follow my journey, you can find that through my social links on markpattisonnfl.com. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, Pattison, P-A-T-T-I-S-O-N, NFL.com. So, until the next podcast, just remember, clear eyes, full hearts, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion, so make it happen. Thank you. Bye.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.